Venkat Chandramoleshwar, our first Lumiere Learning Monday guest, who's here to talk to us about a topic that possibly all of us are feeling very wistful about not doing in most of 2020 and are wondering how we can get back to one of those aspects of life that and experiences that we so look forward to, and that's travel. So I'm so delighted to have Venkat Chandramoleshwar. In fact, he's our second time guest at the Lumiere Learning Monday. He is the head of travel products, partnerships, and strategy at Google, based out of Singapore. And welcome. So good to see you. How are you doing this afternoon?
Uh, Very well, thank you. Thanks for the invite. Great to be speaking with you at now I've been passionate about as a profession and from a personal aspect. Uh, and, yeah, looking forward to the conversation. It's a nice word to.
So, in fact, I must tell our audience that we attempted to talk about it in 2020 twice, but COVID was making sure that this was not the topic, this is not the time to talk about travel. And perhaps, it was really some kind of a divine intervention that kept us from having this session, scheduled session, or rescheduled to what better date than the first working day for all of us at Lumiere, which is the 4th of Jan. Many of us are in the office today. And thank you, Venkat, for coming here today. And we have, as you know, have started the business unusual series where we invited leaders from different sectors to come and talk to us about what's happening in their sectors, what's been the COVID impact, how has the sector innovated, what has pivoted, and what are some of the trends. And that's really what we're going to be talking about today. So tell me, it's been 10 years for you. It's going to be 10 years for you. How did your journey with travel and the travel sector really begin? Did it begin with Google, or was it like something that you came to Google with? Tell us a little more about you.
So I'm an engineer by training, and I actually worked in the automotive industry in the US for several years before doing an MBA and actually joining United Airlines. So it's the airline industry in which I began my travel journey. There's a lot of tech innovation happening in the airline industry at the time I joined. You know, People may find it hard to believe. Airlines are usually in the news going bankrupt, making losses. We know premium, to bankruptcy. But airlines and the travel industry have actually done a fair amount of innovation. I was always involved in travel-related technology, and I moved to a technology company after United Airlines. And that company that I worked with was actually acquired by Google as Google began to look at ways in which it proved how it helps users search for travel on Google. And that was my journey into Google. And I still work in that area. I work in the partnerships team, which is responsible for all of the behind the scenes partnerships that enable better travel search experiences for users who are searching on Google or on Google Maps and all other Google properties.
Fabulous. I mean, what are the chances that your passion for travel, all your education with engineering, your MBA at Chicago booth, bringing in that experience of technology, again, mergers, because I'm sure you do a lot of that with the partners that you identify, and then again, the technology of seeing how this product, and then your marketing acumen to see how you price it and productize it, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Like, frankly, when I was thinking back, right, in 2000, when I finished my MBA, it was the peak time for e-commerce uh, and the tech boom in the US. And I was frankly quite risk averse to joining any of the tech companies. But it's come around full circle, and I'm, quite. It's been a good ride actually. Yeah.
So tell us, I mean, each one of us has been impacted by COVID. You guys in Singapore are doing it very differently. And what has been the impact on the travel industry, Venkat?
So travel is as social an activity that you that you can get into, and it's actually been like significantly battered by what happened, like many other industries. But travel is probably also one of the most discretionary activities that people do. And so as a result of all of that, the industry actually has been hit pretty hard. Now, the travel industry has faced these kind of headwinds in the past, right? With SARS, with the 9/11 attacks that happened in the US, with the global financial crisis that happened. So the industry has been battered, and many a times people say that travel industry gets hit earliest, the latest, right? Because again, because of the discretionary nature of the of travel as well. So yeah, this has been and the impact has been pretty significant. Like, just to give some anecdotal, you know, reference points, like about 40 or so airlines have actually filed for bankruptcy.
Yeah.
There are leading online travel companies which are like major brands, Expedia, Agoda, etc., who have had to lay off like thousands of people. Um, there are a lot of small, fragmented business owners and operators in the travel industry, like the tour operators who do the half-day tour around, whatever destination that you're going to, for example. A lot of them have actually lost their livelihood. So it's been a very significant impact on travel. But I think the belief generally is that the travel is extreme. The industry is pretty actually, it will actually position itself come back.
Yeah. I think the industry is resilient also because the need is so real.
Yes. Mhm.
So it kind of, I think, just works in tandem, right? Isn't it?
Absolutely, right. That's what they say, that the longer that you don't travel, the bigger your next travel plans are, right? And so I think that's broadly true. Now, on the flip side, right, there have been challenges as well of over tourism, right? It's hard to believe sitting here
Hmm.
today to think about that. But in 2018 and 2019, in Europe in particular, Spain, Italy, there were a lot of citizens and local resident protests, not protests, but voices raised against over tourism. Like Venice is a great example, where the the amount of inbound tourists into Venice had grown to such a level that there were concerns about that. There were concerns about, are we leaving a very big carbon footprint because of the excessive travel doing. So compared to where we are, but yeah, just kind of wanted to point that out, is that was another perspective about travel, is that, hey, maybe we should not be traveling as much or as or as often,
Or overdoing one place, perhaps also.
or overdoing. Yeah, absolutely. Like everybody wants to go to the Eiffel Tower, and that shows, right, that then that begins to choke up Paris and Paris tourism. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So now that things are slowly opening up, and of course we are missing the whole real experience. So what are trends
Mhm.
for recovery in the travel industry, Venkat?
Um, so I think generally speaking, I think there were some consumer surveys that were done. 2/3 of the respondents across a wide spectrum of economic strata, age groups, etc., and countries. 2/3 of the people kind of said that they are, you know, they can't wait to travel again. So that latent pent up demand is very, but I think it's very important for the industry, for people, for governments to ensure that any recovery that happens in a very responsible manner, given
Yeah.
we know what can happen if that doesn't, if that's not adhered to. So the trends that are being seen, and most of these are pretty obvious, is that international travel as we knew it is pretty much out the window, except for necessary, highly necessary travel, emergency travel, right? It's travel will emerge, recover, and it will recover more from a regional and a local
Nice.
perspective. I think it's also very clear that nor are the big cities kind of the go-to destinations. Nobody really wants to go to a big city. They want to actually get away into smaller towns, into off the beaten path destinations. And in fact, I was speaking with a colleague of mine in the US who took a road trip from Chicago all the way to California to meet his parents and come back with his family. So they did a pretty long road trip. So they were actually traveling through the, through the Midwest and the much less populated aspect areas of the US. And his comment was that every hotel or motel on the way was actually pretty well packed, which
Oh,
also kind of shows this point that people are trying to kind of get away. They're not going towards cities, but they're actually in Arizona and in, in Utah and all these places which you would otherwise not generally be traveling to. So I think that's another thing. And then lastly, or what the one other key thing that stands in mind is we've all become attuned when we search for travel to look for prices. Hey, what's the lowest price, right? Oh, Indigo is 1,200, Go Air is 1,190. I'm going to take Go Air, right? Price became a very big determinant in what we purchase. But now I think a lot of non-price factors will begin coming in. Convenience. Is this a shorter flight? Am I connecting? Or when it comes to hotels, what's the reviews? What are the ratings of the hotels? And ratings not just in service but also cleanliness, right? So a lot of those things will actually begin getting more important. Um, and I think so. Like those are some key trends that we begin seeing. And one final thing I would like to say is a lot of us who work and have been used to, in some cases, having extremely hectic business travel schedules. All forecasts point to business travel recovering much slower than
mm,
leisure travel. Um, for one of the reasons just being that we're all this time around really getting used to working remote, engaging with our partners, engaging with our colleagues over over video calls, etc. These cycles have happened in the past, but I think it's just not been as prolonged and as proven as it is now.
fantastic. I think that was really heartening because it actually moves to a sort of more rationalized, a more broad basing, a more networked, if I may use the word sensible in quotes,
Hmm.
way of going about travel, and willy
Correct.
nilly we just do good to the plan for the planet.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So this point you brought about, right, is about, which let's call that sustainability. I think it was on many people's minds, but it was not really brought out front and center. So even before COVID, you could actually buy carbon offset. You could pay for carbon offset points every time for many airlines before you took a flight, for example. So you could at least remain carbon neutral. But I think those aspects are coming front and center now. So an example, again, an anecdotal example is somebody staying at a hotel is probably going to say, "Hey, I'm staying here for 2 nights or 3 nights, and I don't want anybody coming and doing the housekeeping and changing the sheets, right? If they're doing that for a particular reason, but the impact it has, which from a sustainability perspective, is actually a good thing. So lots of things, whether consciously or not, are actually falling in place for the better. That's for sure. Yeah.
So when COVID happened, how did Google respond to it? How did you all respond to it vis-a-vis people? Because you have some of the best minds. How do you keep them engaged? How do you keep them feeling that they can be a part of the solution? How can you keep up the morale? So were there some agendas that you took up?
Um, so two things, right? One, from a working perspective, and how, like, I'll talk about how the work uh, pattern, remote work, how that affected us, and then two, what were some of the things done to actually respond to the crisis itself, and then of course beyond that. Um, so with a couple of 100,000 employees and and other vendors, contractors, etc., that's kind of the size of the total base of employee base at Google. uh, in general, Google has been a very distributed workplace, with a lot of tech collaboration tools very actively used. So to that extent, when and also Google happened to be, along with a few other tech companies, one of the early uh, companies to kind of call the work from home, announce the work from home mandate. So I think, while this was difficult, definitely for various different reasons, at least the tech enablement was already in place. People were used to working with people across multiple offices through video calls, through collaborative, like, productivity tools, and so that aspect of it actually worked out quite well. um, there was definitely a lot of burnout, and all of us have actually gone through this, right? On one hand, it feels like so comfortable to work from home, don't need to commute, etc., but on the other hand, there's a lot of emotional and mental stress that it actually provides. So that, Google and its HR teams, I think they did an amazing job to kind of proactively reach out, directly and through managers, to make sure that the teams were keeping up their spirits. One example of that is just kind of doing virtual offsites, where you're doing things like, everybody is joining in from their home, but you're doing an activity, a craft or whatever together. So you're in it uh, together. You're doing something that's not work related, and also enables you to just kind of do that chit chat and the social discussions that you otherwise are not able to do in a formal uh, conference call. um, from from a there were, no, to the point you mentioned, there were a lot of people, especially I'll talk about on the across engineering or across partnerships, who wanted to do things to help, because of the reach Google has. There's a lot of opportunity for us to help, and so eh, that almost got categorized as like a priority zero for for the first 100 days, the first 200 days. We need to, you could drop off other projects and actually focus on projects that would have a very strong impact. So one example I can give you from the travel side is that we began finding, not in the very early stages, but after the first few months, where as people were beginning to at least embark on local domestic travel, we began finding out that users were very keen to understand what kind of cleanliness features hotels had, right? Were they certified? Were they practicing social distancing? Where, did they? There was a time when hotels would actually leave the rooms um, empty for 2 days before they handed it out to the next guest, right? So just kind of creating some space between check-in and check-outs. So these kinds of features were what like users were beginning to kind of seek out. And so the partnerships team, for example, we had to kind of look out as to who could provide us that information, how we could collect that information and begin showing that to users when they were searching for hotels on Google.
Nice.
So a lot of things in response to uh, the early effects of COVID were actually encouraged and prioritized. Yeah.
That's very, very good. And I notice you're not sitting, you're standing.
Hmm. Yeah. Uh,
So tell
uh,
me about that. Is that like a Google thing also?
I'm not sure if it's a Google thing, but it's something I first figured out after I joined Google. Is that most of the desks or in any Google office have a standing feature, so you can adjust the height, but you can actually have it completely standing as well. I think it was meant more as for example, in my case, just very personally speaking, in the afternoons, you've had a nice lunch and then, you sit down instead of that, if you're standing, you're actually a little more alert and stimulated. But not only standing desks, but Google also has some very quirky things. We have desks with a treadmill below it, right? So, and those treadmills are designed not to go extremely fast, but there are people who walk while they're working. I see a lot of engineers use that because they spend a lot of time writing code, and therefore they are relatively sedentary, and they actually find that this offsets that behavior and actually keeps them a bit more agile and healthy. So yeah, that's one thing about working in the office that I think I miss, and I'm sure various folks in various companies miss as well, is the workspaces, right? The collaborative workspaces that we have. That's one of the key things we miss, and it's quite difficult to replicate that through technology. Yeah.
Yeah, so someone is saying desks with a treadmill. How cool is that?
Right. Yeah. Like I don't, for the life of me, I don't think I will. I don't think I could adapt to that. I think I'll fall off the treadmill. But it's something that's quite popular, and you can actually you just sign up or book it, and you get to use it for the day. Yeah.
Awesome. That is so cool. I've had the good fortune of being at the Google office in Singapore. I think last January, and it was quite an experience in thoughtful design. Every little thing from the time you enter the office till you leave, the number of ahas you kind of collect. It's like a treasure hunt.
It is. It is. Yeah. It's the whole open collaborative environment, which interestingly now has to be rethought, and the teams are rethinking that. And I think it will come back in a way that I think just make it a bit more formalized. Is that I would foresee that with my team, I should be able to book a collaborative workstation environment, let's say with 5 tables and some some whiteboards, etc. I think it will go into that mode. It will not be permanently for us, but it's something that we book for whenever we need to collaborate. But probably the rest of the time we're all working from home. So I think work in general looks like it will move to like a hybrid model of X number of days at work when you're focusing on collaboration, and then the remainder days when you're at home when you're doing heads down, uh, you know, uh, either you're working on a certain specific project, or you're doing some coding or whatever.
So I'm also curious to understand. You sort of have always been so technology forward, and you talk about technology in travel.
Mhm.
How is that piece going to change, Venkat, because of COVID? The whole deployment of technology, the whole use of technology, and maybe new technologies.
Right. You know, this there's this meme that's gone around for some time, which essentially asks the question, who led the digital transformation at your company? And it gives you three options: your CEO, the CTO, or COVID-19, right? And the answer is, or the answer implied in that meme is COVID-19. So I think the adoption of technology, uh, the aspiration to get one's business transformed has been front and center, but generally kind of put down to priority one or priority two. That has changed. So the one thing we are seeing is that there was a lot of technology already taking shape, but the adoption of that has gone up exponentially, which is a good thing, because it just makes companies that much more productive, and so much more reachable to the large user base. So in travel, if I look at it from the areas that I work in, very broadly, right, technology is used for the day-to-day operations. Let's say if it's a hotel or an airline, or if I'm a tour operator, I use technology for my day-to-day operational use. I use technology to make sure that my products can be on as many shelves,
Yeah.
online and otherwise everywhere. So the whole distribution aspect of it. And the third aspect of that is marketing, personalization, which is becoming so much more data intensive. And I see that there's a lot of progress happening on all of those fronts. So much so that if I'm a small, let's say, operator, let's say I provide half-day bike tours around Singapore, an example. A year ago, relied on just listing my services on Make My Trip and Expedia, a few online travel agencies, and I would have just kind of survived with that. But fast forward to today, I see it's very clear for me to make sure that I have a website, that I am not only on those sites but also on many other sites which can reach the customer. That I do take out ads and reach customers through Facebook or Google and other means. That I create YouTube videos and actually post them, because there are folks who discover my product by watching a video and then want to come and book it. So I think that adoption is increasing and will only increase significantly going forward of technology.
I think much of what you said is answered this question that's come from one of the Facebook users. Travel is so doomed now with business so low. Are travel companies adopting new technology with so much uncertainty in business? That's their question.
That's a question. Yeah, it's a good question. I think the beauty of adopting technology now is that technology has more or less moved from being a fixed cost to a variable cost. So I'll just play on that example of me being this bike tour operator. I can sign up to one of 100 different companies that offer me a very easy to use uh, app, or a platform to manage my inventory and all that kind of stuff, and to create my website. And I need to pay for this on a per booking basis, right? So the risk, therefore, it's very different from me having to learn, invest, buy that, versus just paying as you go. So I think, and one of the reasons for, I think, is
Yeah.
cloud computing largely, right? And so I think that has definitely benefited uh, folks, that you can actually use it in these situations as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's really there, that whole enabling because of the pay as you use. So you don't need to make big upfront,
That's
so
correct.
it's technology today is, I think, as ubiquitous as air that we breathe or water that we drink. I think it's
Hmm.
almost become survival.
Hmm.
So just, you mentioned something very interesting about the surge in local travel. So I was speaking with a friend last week he and his family had gone to uh, Ellora, Aurangabad, to see the caves,
Mm.
and there was a 75-year-old tourist guide who was obviously very, very knowledgeable, who was taking them around and saying that he was possibly their his first customer after many, many months. And
Wow.
I'm just getting an idea as you're speaking that maybe there are a lot of such local tourist individuals, and in your search partnerships, if there is a way to even find who these heroes are. And I've
Hmm.
had a similar experience myself at the Sun Temple in
Hmm.
Konark 7 years ago, or maybe whatever, 10 years ago when we were there. And again, met someone who was extraordinary. I mean, he was like a walking encyclopedia and so full of stories. And you kind of meet these individuals, Venkats. I'm just wondering if Google can find a way of having these individuals tagged in quotes so you can actually find them somewhere.
No, it's a great it's a great point. Something that we should definitely look into. Um, one of the trends in travel and some of the startups in travel, even pre-COVID, were actually looking at peer-to-peer um, travel collaborations, right? So basically it's like tours with locals, right? There's a company called Tours with Locals. There are many such startups have formed, but what you are saying actually, uh, really intrigues me because there are so many tour guides who could, easier for them to list themselves, their service, let's say the windows of time that they operate in, and that can be accessed by a large user base. And let's
Absolutely.
say that whole that supply demand match happens, and the payment also doesn't need to be cash, right? It can all be digitized. Yeah, that is amazing level of innovation that can be done there. And uh, it's like the Uber model, right? You have the
Yes.
drivers, the and
That's
yeah,
what I mean, exactly.
yeah. That's a great suggestion and a great area to look into. Yeah.
Yeah. Two things actually, strike one. One is, of course, the whole individual that's not lost, and that in that individual skill is also preserved. The whole humanizing aspect. So, how can
Correct.
technology be an enabler? It's sort of providing a platform and to lift up a lot of these individual uh, artists, because they are artists in their ability to tell stories and to narrate and to tell you the history.
True. True. Completely. Yeah. And you know, sometimes we find that we over over engineer, or not over engineer, but we try to automate uh, too many things. So for example, there have been efforts in the past, or companies which have started up to kind of say, we'll create this completely automated itinerary for you.
Yeah.
um, there is something to be said about that, but there's also something to be said about having visual influence, right? About, okay, I would recommend these things, but I would actually trade this off for something else, because that's and you can't, right? You might have as much technology as you can, but that individual preference that comes in, I think can't be replaced. And I know a lot of people who travel based on individual preferences, and they would they would do that all over again, just because of kind of the insights that you get in, which are just so much more personalized. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, interestingly, one of the first or second Learning Monday that we did soon after lockdown was with Wedding Sutra, which is a
Mm,
platform for weddings. And we had Karthik Tyagarajan, who was
mm,
our guest, founder of Wedding Sutra and co-founder. And we were talking about destination weddings and the what it will mean. And today, when people are sort of looking, and I'm also an interested party, because wedding again is an area that's on my mind. So how does one bring in, what's the innovation around this? Because this has been a very big market,
mhm.
the whole wedding travel market, isn't it, for
Correct. Yeah.
India?
Yeah. That's true.
We have someone asking here, Sudha Vasant. I'm a small business owner. Earlier, I used to advertise on Google and XB alone, and now I see myself being forced to spend higher on ads. Any tips? Thank you for size. Thank you for that, Sudha.
Um, so I don't have like an answer right away on a tips of, like from specific tips, but the cost of ads, at least on Google, based on an auction that Google runs, and it depends on what various um, advertisers are actually bidding on for a particular keyword. So if it's shoes and lots of people are bidding on that particular keyword, then the ad costs actually go up. Uh,
Hmm.
if anything, there's been there's been two influences happening in general. One is that with um, uh, many companies have actually slowed down on advertising, given at least in the early stage of the pandemic, a lot of companies slowed down on advertising because not a lot of people were actually in the market to buy, based on, again, depending on what one is selling. Not a lot of people were there spending a lot of money to buy you know, uh, other than non-essential goods and services. But as the economy has begun recovering, people are increasing their budgets to spend more. So I think it's a very complex
Yeah.
ecosystem of various different factors at play. So I'm not able to comment on this right away, not knowing more about more of the specifics.
I think just this information on the bidding is very helpful, and the fact that one then needs to identify uh, adjacent words or things that one can actually use to popularize or to create awareness. So thank you
Correct.
for that, Sudha. Uh, I just wanted to ask for people who are, group travelers, and then you have solo travelers, and there's this whole experience seekers and experience travelers. So there's a whole social aspect of not necessarily travel with people, but you're virtually carrying a lot of people with you as you're
Mhm.
doing your diary updates and you're kind of keeping people abreast. So
Mhm.
uh, when you're identifying partners, when you're identifying partnerships, how does Google search? I mean, you help us search, but how do you guys search for more partners? And
Um, that's that's a good question. I think it varies. So let me just put in context, like partnerships, right? So if, for example, you searched for weather on Google, earlier on we would have shown you several different links that would send you to various websites that could help you with weather. But today, in addition to those, you will also see a unit which kind of gives you the weather, and it will say that this is sourced from, let's say, weather.com. There are
okay,
different partners that we work with. So when it is when these are when this is content that is relatively, let me call it, mature or established, it is quite clear as to who those partners are, and then it all comes into who can we create a good partnership with, where can we get the best terms of partnership, um, and bearing in mind that it could be different country by country, right? Because weather is one example, but let's look at a lot of folks using maps, for example, want to get real-time traffic updates on for public transport. There, the partners are different. Singapore will have a different partner, uh, Mumbai will have a different partner, and so on. I think when it comes down to things which are less obvious, so things like you know, let's say, uh, I'm trying to think of an example uh, from travel, where it is, in travel, let's say you have reviews, right? We would like the users to see a lot of other users reviews on travel. um, so that's probably much more of a niche area, and that's kind of where we rely on folks like me in the partnerships team who have industry background to
uh,
keep abreast with the industry, to understand who is, uh, you know, who are the players in the ecosystem, who are the new startups coming up, in the ecosystem, and how do we actually partner up with them. So it depends on kind of what the content is, what the search, content that we are looking for partnerships on. But to your point, it varies based on how what it is. Yeah.
Okay, that's helpful. Is I didn't know, for example, that you would have naturally, now that you say it just seems obvious, but you'd have a different partner in for maps in Singapore from the one that they have in Mumbai. So it's in a sense also pretty local, right? The whole sourcing.
It becomes extremely local. That's correct. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, one of my favorite areas is really the whole from a sustainability angle is rural ecotourism. Uh, so we've sort of been working to create some kind of a pilot on how can you create a sustainable model for building rural enterprise around travel and experiences. So in a sense, it's of course you have Airbnb, so it's like getting things uh, sort of getting places on the map which hitherto don't know Airbnb or have never heard of it, and how do you kind of get take that even deeper. So
Yeah.
that's one of the things that we are looking to do something with, ever since we got exposed to how this kind of the hostels model works so well in Israel, and we studied that in 2017, and we saw it's fantastic for building even inclusivity in the culture,
Correct.
having people build more trust and confidence, particularly when, especially in these times where people are very fearful. How can you break those sort of divides in the mind, and how can you
Yeah.
kind of make the oneness of humanity more accessible and understood in a tangible, real way? So,
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I think there's a great. I think there's a lot of startups, a lot of investments that have been happening in travel, and I think what you pointed out here is probably another great idea, because I think there'll be a lot of demand for travel to rural areas, for example, and I think there can be so much that can be done to match
yeah.
up the supply for that kind of travel. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're at the last 2 minutes of our segment today. And I think, Venkat, you've given us in this short period of time such a, you've really taken us places, literally, from the topics that we've covered, from how you do it at Google, the impact on the travel industry, and what the trends for recovery are. So I think the word hope is something that I should be focusing on for 2021 with respect to travel.
Completely. Yeah. Yeah. I would agree. Yeah.
And I think even in terms of what the being local and exploring our own geography. And I think we in India, I know there are people watching from other parts of the world, but each one of us, I mean, we often don't know what are those hidden gems that many of our friends overseas have to tell us, that have you seen XYZ place? And quite likely we haven't, but it was so close to us that we never paid it any attention. It happens to all of us, isn't it?
Exactly. Exactly. So I think in the coming year, you probably will go on a tour of Mumbai. Sounds odd, but and discover areas that you probably not discovered, and that could be a tour run by somebody who would otherwise have been running a tour of the top spots of Mumbai, right? The Gateway of India, and so on and so forth. And that pivot will happen, and I think it's good for travel overall, as to the entire ecosystem, that kind of those kinds of changes take shape.
Yeah, and there are some of those kind of startups and experiences like Haki Tours, for example, who are doing
Mm.
some fantastic events.
Yeah.
Thank you. We are at 11:30, and Venkat, you've come here. You've had a superb. I've had a superb conversation with you, and I look forward to being in touch and to learning more. Thank you once again for coming today. Especially when we kick off 2021 with your sessions. Very, very special for us.
On, but responsibly.
Thank you. Bye bye. Good luck.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.